I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Hey, let me ask you something. How are your investments doing? The S&P 500 is up 22% from its low point, which was this day 1 year ago. Overall in 2022, it lost about 18%. I bring that up because we're going to be talking about investments tonight with big, no, huge portfolios. The Oregon PERS Fund. It was down last year, too, and that might have implications for Oregon taxpayers. It's our big story tonight. That Public Employee Retirement System fund, also known as PERS, is massive. It's roughly $103 billion, give or take on any particular day. It's partly funded by your tax dollars when you pay for schools and other government services. But last year, the PERS investments overall lost money. And it's unfunded liability, meaning the amount of money it has versus what it would have to pay out if every worker covered by the fund retired today, which of course won't happen. Well, that amount is short by roughly $28 billion. And you should care about that because if you pay Oregon taxes, you'll likely be paying more to support that fund next year. That was revealed a couple of weeks ago at this regular meeting of the PERS board. The person speaking in the light-colored coat is Matt Larrabee. He's an expert in pension and retiree programs sponsored by governments. He works for the consulting firm Milliman, which helps PERS with its fund.
2022 calendar year was not a great year in the investment markets for PERS or for any other system. We had a return of between -1.5% and -2%.
Yeah, that's fancy speak for we lost money. And since the fund lost money, the unfunded liability grew by $8 billion to that total of $28 billion. The reason that concerns you is there's only two ways to get that number back up to zero. Either increase the taxes to kick more money into the funds or figure out a way to get better investment returns. But should we be worried about that dismal return last year? Well, Oregon State Treasurer Tobias Reed, who is now running for Secretary of State, says yes, and at the same time, no.
Well, no one would ever be excited about losing money, but I think it's important to think about what happened in that year and to place this all in a little bit of context. So let's go back into that year and think about all the things that we were all reading about. Really high inflation, interest rates on the rise, commodities, a simmering war in the Ukraine. So it created a really volatile environment for investing in the world, and that's the world in which we operate. But 1% does stand up pretty well against some of the alternatives. So imagine a portfolio that is a very plain vanilla 70% stocks, 30% bonds. We use that to compare sometimes. That portfolio would be down about 16% in that same period of time. Or look at two other pension funds that are really well regarded and really well run. The state of Wisconsin was down 11% plus. CalPERS, the California Public Employee Retirement System, was down over 6%. So in that context, again, we're not happy about 1% down, but 1% is a lot better than some of those alternatives. The other key point is to think about timeframes. We are a lot less concerned about 1 year than we are about long-term averages because our obligations to retirees extend way out into the future.
All right, some interesting context there. Reed points out that the returns over the last 10 years and the last 20 years are up more than 8%. As to the question of whether we should worry about the system going broke, Reed says no, it's not going to go broke. And he expects it could break even in the next 30 years. In part because there's going to be fewer Tier 1 retirees getting benefits.
The bulk of that unfunded liability is associated with what's known as Tier 1, a structure that existed up until 1996 for new entrants. Since then, the design of the program, which is set by the legislature, not by Treasury, changed, and the system is much better funded in Tier 2 and Tier 3. So that continuation of demographic trends will go on, and the funded status on current projections and assumptions improves over time.
Okay, so to say that in English, what you're saying is Tier 1 retirees are very expensive.
Yes.
And over time, there's going to be fewer and fewer of those because
Yes.
of actuarial tables, and people are not going to keep living.
Yes.
And so that expense drops away,
That's
and
right.
the other people that are coming behind are not as expensive.
That's right. They're in a different system that is structured very differently.
At the same time, you expect the investments to continue to grow and the entire pie to get bigger.
That's right. You're very good at translating this.
Well, thank you very much. Of course, all of that comes with the disclaimer that markets fluctuate and world events could impact the markets as well. And then there's the future cost of state employment contracts. For example, this past summer, Governor Kotek approved a new contract deals with both of the state's largest unions. 22,000 state workers represented by the Oregon union SEIU 503 got 6.5% cost of living raise for this current year, another 6.5% cost of living raise for next year. On top of that, workers are eligible for step increases as they advance at their jobs. In addition to the state paid out a lump sum bonus of $1,500 to each union member. The other biggest union in the state is AFSCME's. It's negotiated a similar package for its state workers. According to the Treasurer's office, those two contracts added about $1 billion to the PERS unfunded liability. Well, we'd love to hear your thoughts about all of this. Are you part of PERS? Do you have concerns about the investments losing money last year? Or did the Treasurer's comments help calm you down? Email us, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail. Our phone number is 503-226-5090. Today, Multnomah County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson announced an emergency order regarding $62 million for homeless services. Now, this comes after months of discussion and some heated debates over how that money should be spent to address our homeless crisis. That vote happened 2 weeks ago, so, this emergency order today really just means the contracting and distribution of those funds can be sped up. Blair Best explains.
Thank you so much for your patience. I appreciate this.
Inside the Multnomah County headquarters Thursday afternoon,
Thank you all for being here today.
County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson announced her first emergency order since taking office back in January.
I am announcing an emergency order that will jumpstart our efforts to address our homelessness crisis and the incredible behavioral health needs on our streets.
This comes 2 weeks after county commissioners approved how to spend $62 million unspent dollars meant for homeless services. It's also on the precipice of Portland's daytime camping ban that's soon to be enforced.
And these investments have to be implemented in time to change what happens on our street when this ordinance goes into full effect.
Something day centers like Rosehaven are bracing for.
And I imagine that the daytime camping ban, once it's enforced, is only going to bring more people to our doorstep.
Because of that, and for the first time, Rosehaven, along with Blanchet House, will soon get money from the county so they can expand their services.
We're thrilled to be named as an agency. I think a lot of times day shelters haven't gotten a lot of recognition or support in the cities.
They still don't know how much money they'll be getting, so we asked the county chair.
How much money will the day centers pointed out, like Rosehaven and Blanchet House, be getting?
So we have made a total investment of about $3.3 million for day services. The specific amounts for different organizations is yet to be determined.
I'm not exactly sure what that means for us yet, but we're really excited about what this might be able to help us with.
The county is now also spending $500,000 on a new day center in North Portland. Info on that is also limited.
I can't give you more details right now, but as soon as we have details for share, we will do that.
Portland's mass-sanctioned campsites will be getting the most money, $16 million, to build 2 more of them. The first is already open in Southeast. Money will also be going toward building a downtown Portland sobering center and a 24/7 stabilization center for people leaving detox.
And I will say that a stabilization center is more a part of a kind of a behavioral health network. A sobering is more of a crisis response kind of first responder place.
So it's not a place that first responders can just take someone who's, say, having a mental health crisis or just suffered an overdose. I mean, that's something that first responders have been calling for.
Yeah, no, a stabilization is different than that, but there's a recognition that we do need to have that.
All right, so clearly there are still some holes in this plan, but the county chair continues to stress that they need to get this money out quickly since they're required to spend it by the end of June. I also want to point out here that accountability will be a focus. Each organization that gets some of this money will be required to track it and then report that back to the county. In Southeast Portland, Blair Best, KGW News.
All right, thanks, Blair. Look forward to that tracking piece. Let's get back to that sobering center versus stabilization center discussion. As we've told you before, there's been a big push from Multnomah County to open a large-scale sobering center, or drunk tank of sorts, to replace the one that closed back in 2020. The only money towards an effort like that is $150,000 toward design, planning, and project development. Instead, we'll get a 24/7 stabilization center, something Chair Vega Peterson has been adamant about. You heard a little of that back and forth between the chair and Blair a few moments ago, but because our show is unlike any other in the market, we wanted to give you more of that discussion to allow all of us to better understand the difference.
What is the difference between a stabilization center and a sobering center?
Yeah, so a sobering center is a really limited duration place for people to go so that they can sober from whatever influence they're under. Traditionally, that has been alcohol, right? So, you know the term drunk tank, right? It was a place where people could be picked up, they could go. It was a room where they had like a lot of cots and people could really just sober up after a few hours. I think when the decision was made to stop the City of Portland funded sobering center was because the complexity and that was happening with people who were under the influence of different types of drugs was necessitated like higher levels of healthcare and management oversight. So that's why we are having 8 additional sobering beds come online later this fall that are going to be in a more healthcare focused settings, right? That's going to be something that Unity is working on. Providence is also looking at increasing their sobering beds early next year. I think that the difference between sobering is that it is usually like less than 24 hours. So usually it's about 23 hours. There are certain hold requirements, right, that might be related to that. The stabilization center is going to be 20 plus beds that people can stay in for a much longer period of time, anywhere from 30, 60, 90 days. So people really who have been in addiction, who have gone through treatment, who are coming out of sobering have a more stable place to stay.
Now, the chair said she recognized the need for sobering beds, but apart from that $150,000 to study the large sobering centers in the city, it appears the only movement on that front is 8 beds that she mentioned from Unity opening this fall, plus another 9 sobering beds opening at Providence next year. Now, let's get to some of your thoughts on our big story from last night. Investigative reporter Kyle Aboshi found that some of the newer models of Tesla vehicles experience something called phantom braking. That happens when the car's sensors think that there's something in front of it, so it slams on the brakes. The problem has led to at least 1 death and happens when the car's traffic-aware cruise control is activated. Now, a bunch of you got in touch with us last night to say, hey, that's definitely happened to me. Here's a comment on the KGW YouTube page. I purchased a Model Y long range in May and drove it to Oregon in August. We started in central Pennsylvania, and about halfway through the trip, I started experiencing phantom braking. It happened at least 4 times going out and twice on the return trip home. I was fortunate that when it first happened, there were no other cars around us. And how about this from Lindy? Thank you that we now have a name for the phenomenon we've been describing at least 6 times to workers at Tesla service departments for the past 2 years. We had 2 close calls while driving on the freeway in eastern Oregon. Completely out of the blue, our car came to an abrupt slowdown with semi-trucks right behind us. If I hadn't been able to pull over to the side of the freeway, those trucks would have barreled right over us. A number of you said that it's happened to you too, but there's a quick and easy fix. The answer is simple. When this occurs, press the accelerator with your foot. The car responds immediately. Also, I have only had partial phantom braking with my 2023 Model Y a couple of times. The problem seems to be solved now through updates that every Tesla car got. Well, we certainly hope so. There's another big theme in your comments following our story yesterday. It's not just Teslas, turns out. Mike wrote to us to say, a hit job against Tesla, inappropriate. Kyle failed to mention that other cars that also feature automatic emergency braking also have phantom braking issues. I've experienced this myself in a 2016 Volt and 3 of 4 Teslas. A quick touch on the accelerator at the first sign of strange hesitation stops it, and I rarely lose more than 5 or 10 miles an hour. Thanks for sharing that with us. Steve wrote in to say, this is not a Tesla-specific problem. My 2021 Cadillac Escalade does the same thing. I'm on Super Cruise and all of a sudden it flashes red and brakes hard. This happens on the freeway. I've experienced it several times. And how about this from Todd? In a year, our 22 Model Y has never done this, but every other car I've owned with front mitigation has done this quite often. Honda, Acura, and Toyota. Not sure why people are just picking up on the Tesla models. We'll be sure to pass your comments on to Kyle. And if you have an experience with phantom braking that you'd like to share, you know the drill. email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave us a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Coming up next on The Story, the annual solar eclipse is set to pass over parts of Oregon on Saturday morning, but will the clouds block our view? Chief Meteorologist Matt Zaffino joins us after the break with the latest forecast and, of course, all the science and data you can handle. That's when The Story returns. On Saturday morning, parts of Oregon will be in the path of the annular solar eclipse, which is different from what we saw 6 years ago. This type of eclipse has earned the name Ring of Fire. But will the clouds play nice and allow people to actually see it? Let's find out from Chief Meteorologist Matt Zaffino. First, let's start with the best places to potentially see it. Then, what are the weather models telling you about the cloud cover, and why is it called the Ring
of Fire?
Right.
Why is it called that? Let's start with that because I've got my props with me right here. So imagine this baseball is the sun. Imagine this round-ish thing is the moon. So the thing is, like in 2017, if the moon is in the right position, it totally blocks the entire disk of the sun. But because this time the moon is farther away from the sun, it doesn't block the entire disk. So that's why it's an annular eclipse, annular as in annulus, meaning ring, and that is why we get that ring of fire surrounding the sun. So it'll still be super cool. It's just different from what we had back in 2017. Okay, onto the path and onto the specifics with the forecast. So again, it should look something like that, but real, of course, if we get a chance to see it, and that's the big question. By the way, if you're staying home in Portland, you're like, yeah, whatever, I'm not traveling. You'll still see a partial eclipse if the clouds clear, which they probably won't. We'd get about 80–85% of the sun being covered by the moon. So you would see a crescent sun if it's a clear sky. So the path itself makes landfall in North America on the coast of Oregon, goes down through southeast Oregon, then down into Nevada, Utah, and points southeast from there. The problem is west of the Cascades, the odds of seeing it are pretty low because we're going to have pretty solid cloud cover. But once you get east of the Cascades, out towards Chiloquin, Chemult, Klamath Falls, and then down towards Lakeview, we'll have fewer clouds and a better chance of seeing it. If you want to really travel down towards, say, Ely, Nevada, then you have an excellent chance. Same thing across Utah. It'll go right over the Four Corners region. It's kind of interesting, the path of this, because it goes over some big metropolitan areas, right over Albuquerque, New Mexico, right over Midland and Odessa, Texas, right there. It goes right over San Antonio, Texas, and then finally we'll exit North America, at least the continent, and there's San Antonio, down by Corpus Christi, Texas. So it's an interesting path that it covers so many places. Now, this map is a little hard to follow, but stick with me here on this. What you're looking at here is where it's white. that's where you have clear sky. Where it's gray, that's where we have cloud cover. So this is forecast visibility, white good, gray bad. There is some white over Oregon, but there's also quite a bit of gray, meaning the cloud cover, and then a good clear sky down through Nevada, Utah, and points south and east again. Let's simplify that a little bit because, again, that was a little bit hard to read, even for me. This is a great graphic put together by the folks at the National Weather Service office down in Medford, showing southern Oregon, the counties here. Here's Medford, there's Roseburg, Klamath Falls, Lakeview, and here's the visibility on the bottom. You can see the west side is gray, bad visibility, but you get into the blue out around Lakeview and down in Modoc County, California, and then at least we have a pretty decent chance of seeing it. So that's where we're going to want to go. Let me summarize that for you. In an even simpler way, of course, coast of the Cascades, cloudy. I wouldn't go there if you want to see it. East of the Cascades, I'm saying there's a chance, pretty good chance, there'll be breaks in the clouds. It happens about 9 o'clock in the morning, so we'll be looking east, and then a full clear sky. If you want that, you got to go down to Nevada. And Pat, you and I were talking about our favorite memories of the 2017 eclipse. This is one of mine, watching it with my entire family.
Nice. I was down at the Volcano Stadium, I think, in Salem, with a big crowd of baseball people watching.
Super cool.
Good times.
You bet.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Still ahead on the story, gray whales started dying along the Pacific coast at alarming rates in 2019, and experts have wondered why ever since. Now researchers at Oregon State say they have discovered a smoking gun, definitive evidence of what's been killing the whales. Environmental reporter Cale Williams explains when the story returns. Tonight, we're finally getting an answer to the big question surrounding gray whales in the Pacific Ocean. Their numbers have been really struggling in recent years, and while many have theorized what could be happening, Oregon State researchers say they now know. Environmental reporter Cale Williams has our story.
Scientists call it an unusual mortality event. In 2019, gray whales started dying off the Pacific coast at alarming rates. But for years, experts couldn't do much more than guess as to why. That is, until now.
Feels like this time we've got a pretty good smoking gun.
That's Josh Stewart, a professor at Oregon State's Marine Mammal Institute. In research published Thursday, he's found the first definitive evidence of what's been killing the whales.
I think we can now say much more conclusively that it probably is, Arctic conditions that are driving these things.
Gray whales migrate more than 12,000 miles each year, spending their winters in Mexico, where they give birth to calves, and heading north in the summer to the rich feeding grounds in the Arctic. And Stewart said that's where the problems began.
And so there's this really tight connection between the sea ice and the prey base for the gray whales.
Gray whales feed on tiny organisms called benthic amphipods. Those amphipods, they feed on algae that grows on the underside of sea ice. With climate change warming the Arctic up to 4 times faster than the rest of the planet, that meant trouble, from the bottom of the food chain all the way up to the top.
And so when you have less sea ice and fewer days of sea ice, you don't get that algae reaching the seafloor to sort of create that productivity that the gray whales need.
Less sea ice makes for skinnier whales, lower birth rates, and malnourished animals washing up on beaches.
It's reducing the amount of food that they have available to them and disrupting that whole food chain that they rely on.
But it's not all doom and gloom.
They're resilient animals. They're adaptive. They can change the areas that they feed in. So, I'm not worried about them going extinct.
Though, with climate change expected to continue warming the Arctic in the years and decades to come, Stewart said we might have to get used to seeing fewer whales off our coast.
We're going to be increasingly, I think, living in a world where we're going to have to deal with these impacts that are hard to reverse and have really significant effects on species that we care a lot about. And that's a hard thing to stomach.
Cale Williams, KGW News.
All right, thanks, Cale. Great that we have scientists like that who can figure this stuff out. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember the story, our collective story, that never ends. The good stuff is coming up next. I hope you'll stick around for that. In the meantime, I'll see you right back here tomorrow night, and we're going to give you a look outside with a whole bunch of beautiful live sky cams.